Warning: this episode contains details that some listeners may find disturbing. August 2010, London, England. A slight, quiet man in his early 30s is making his way through a crowd of shoppers. He ducks into Harrods and buys cakes. Then he walks a few blocks and purchases peppered steaks. Whatever he was planning for the week ahead, it seemed delicious and fun. But that's the last time we have a confirmed sighting of Gareth Williams alive. 8 days later, a police officer let him into Williams' government-owned flat in Pimlico. Right away, he noticed the curtains were drawn, the heat was on, a woman's wig was on the back of a chair, a cell phone, which had been factory reset, on the dining table. And then he walked into the ensuite bathroom. In the bathtub, there was a small North Face duffel bag, sealed with a small padlock. Inside the bag was the naked, decomposing body of Gareth Williams. The 31-year-old was a brilliant mathematician, one of the country's most gifted codebreakers. And here's where things get really strange. The padlock was locked from the outside. The key was inside the bag, underneath his body. This is a study of strange. Welcome back to the podcast. I am Michael. You might have noticed this interesting story bouncing around recently about a group of missing or deceased scientists that all worked for government agencies or NASA or weapon systems. It's a fascinating story, and the White House even commented on it. I recently released an exclusive episode of the show specifically for our Substack supporters about that story. And I don't bring this up to pitch Substack, although I should be doing that. Please go support the show by joining our Substack. You get episodes before they're released, ad-free. You get additional content and articles. Please go check it out through the support tab of our website, astudyofstrange.com. I mainly bring this up because it inspired me to do an episode on the Gareth Williams case today, because it also similarly, there's theories around espionage, government cover-ups, assassinations. It's very mysterious and strange. It probably fits this show better than any other topic I've ever covered. You're going to want to stay and listen to the whole episode because this one runs deep. Gareth Williams was born on the 26th of September, 1978 in Wales. And from the very beginning, he seemed to be operating on a completely different frequency from everybody around him, meaning he was exceptionally brilliant. At 10 years old, he passed his GCSE in mathematics. For my fellow US listeners, that's a test you take at like 15 or 16 in the UK. He showed advanced skill in maths, as they say over there. He went to Bangor University and graduated with a degree in mathematics at just 17. From there, he pursued a PhD at the University of Manchester, and it was here that the GCHQ spotted him. The Government Communications Headquarters is a UK intelligence, security, and cyber agency. The GCHQ it's kind of like the equivalent to the NSA here in the United States. It was born from Bletchley Park, the legendary wartime operation that cracked the Nazi Enigma codes. And in the modern era, GCHQ is the engine room of Britain's digital intelligence, signals interception, cyber defense, code breaking at a scale I don't think any normal people like myself can really imagine. It's housed in a building that locals call the Donut because of its round shape, and it lies in the suburbs of Cheltenham. Gareth Williams started at GCHQ in 2001 at 22 years old, and he would live in the area for about a decade. By all accounts, Gareth was intensely private. He was very much into exercise and fitness. He loved cycling, going on long, solitary rides through the countryside. He loved running and climbing in Wales with his father. He was not particularly social, and his landlords described him as utterly reliable and quiet. Then in 2009, Gareth applied for a permanent position at MI6, the secret intelligence service, the human counterpart to the GCHQ. MI6, that's where James Bond was an operative. You can relate it, I think, to the CIA in the US. And Gareth didn't get the role he applied for, but he was accepted on a 3-year secondment, which is a temporary transfer. And there was the intention behind this that he would return to the GCHQ when it was done. He moved into number 4HE 36 Alderney Street in Pimlico, a government-owned flat just a half-mile from MI6's headquarters at Vauxhall Cross. He started working, and then within a year, he knew he wanted to leave. His sister would tell the inquest that he hated MI6's culture. I look at that as he didn't like city life, he didn't like the hustle and bustle, he didn't like the drinks after work. It just didn't fit him. He was a country boy, a cyclist, a man who really wanted the hills and quiet of the open roads. And by the summer of 2010, he had already told his managers that he was done and was arranging to return to GCHQ in September. There's a lot of speculation and questions around what Gareth Williams was actually doing at MI6. The spy agency is, well, it's a spy agency, so they don't want people to know what's going on there. The Foreign Secretary, William Hague, signed a immunity certificate, a legal mechanism that allowed the intelligence agencies to withhold classified information from the coroner's inquest. Similarly, the U.S. State Department asked that no details of Williams' American working relationships emerge in the proceedings. But here's what we do know. Gareth Williams was working as technical support. He gathers intelligence from London embassies of hostile nations, and he analyzes that data. He was not a field agent. He did not meet contacts in dark alleyways. He wasn't running assets. He wasn't jumping off bridges, shooting guns, and, using parachutes as spies do in movies. His particular expertise was accessing information from mobile phones and other devices. And this is important when we dive into theories. In July of 2010, just weeks before his death, Gareth was in Las Vegas, Nevada, attending hacker and cybersecurity conferences. An investigative journalist reported that Gareth was part of a team of intelligence officers sent to monitor and penetrate hacking networks that were operating both in the US and the UK. He returned to London on August 11th, and according to CCTV footage that was recovered by police, he spent the next few days in the West End and Knightsbridge. He was captured on a camera in the Tube, and on Sunday, August 15th, that's when they saw him purchasing cakes at Harrods and peppered steaks at Waitrose. And that's the last time anybody saw him alive. His laptop showed activity on a cycling website in the early hours of August 16th, and after that, nothing. For about a week, silence. And then there was a phone call made to the police that Gareth Williams hadn't been to work all week. Gareth's absence went unreported for 5 days when he failed to report for work. 5 days. When you have a small team that he worked with, a tight-knit operational unit that was working on sensitive material, in a building and agency that was all about security protocols, and yet it still took them 5 days to be like, hey, maybe we should check in on Gareth. We haven't heard from him in a while. Now, this is likely just a poor mishap by the Secret Services, but it lends itself to some conspiracies and theories around this case. Thank goodness, though, that they finally did call the police, and a welfare check was sent to his flat on August 23rd. The police officer went in through the front shared door to the apartment building, and the scene the police found was this. It was a 2-bedroom flat. He lived there alone. In the living room, a woman's wig hung on a chair. A cell phone, which they later found to be factory reset, was on the table. There were laptop computers, and there were also a few additional phones. And there was nothing to suggest a struggle had taken place in the bathroom. That's where he found the North Face holdall, or duffel bag as we might call it in the States. It was 81 centimeters by 48 centimeters, padlocked and sitting in the tub. The officer lifted it up, or tried to lift it up. It was very heavy, and he noticed fluid on the bottom of the tub. And that's when he started to notice a smell. He cut the bag open, making sure not to disturb the lock or zippers as a way to preserve evidence. And then he was really struck with the foul smell of a decomposing body. Inside the locked bag was Gareth Williams. He was nude, in a fetal position. There were no signs of physical harm, meaning no bruising, no cuts, no bashes. So it didn't look like somebody forced him into the bag. And of course, most unusual of all is that the key to the lock was in the bag below his body. Investigators found no footprints in and around the bath. There were some partial footprints found in other parts of the apartment, but they weren't enough to connect to anybody but Gareth Williams. There were no fingerprints in the bathroom, not on the bathtub, not on the lock or other bits of the top of the bag. And that made it appear as if things had been wiped clean. Also, there was no DNA found on the padlock, on the bag, or the edges of the tub. The heat in the apartment was turned all the way up high, and the reason I bring that up is not just that it's a strange detail, but you would imagine that Gareth was perspiring. If he himself climbed into the bag, he would have left some kind of perspiration residue around the edges of the tub, but they didn't find any of that. There are a few other details commonly reported that I need to comment on. I commonly hear that there were a few phones found in the flat and all of them were restored to factory settings. That's not true. One phone was restored to factory settings, and that might be related to work. You worked with phones and computers. There's a number of those devices around. I say this because there's another phone that they did find that wasn't factory reset that had personal information on it. And this is how they looked up search history information. A lot of times when you read the story, it's from his computer. It wasn't. It was from a phone. And they found that he had looked up some bondage and S&M sites. I will also mention a very odd detail that a previous neighbor would come forward and say that they found him once handcuffed to his bedposts in his underwear, and awkward, embarrassing situation. And he told the neighbor that he just wanted to see if he could escape. So what's emerging when you hear about S&M and being handcuffed to his bed is that there's a story now, there's a theory floating around that he was into those things, just for lack of a better term. This might have been a bit of a kink for him. And connected to that, or maybe not, Gareth also had around $20,000 worth of women's clothing in his flat. Most of it, if not all of it, had not been used. I think that's an important detail. We also have the woman's wig found on the chair, and I watched an interview with the officer that went into his apartment. I think he mentioned there were multiple wigs in the apartment. He also had attended drag shows in the past. There is a reporting that someone saw him on the week he was missing or dead at a drag show. That's likely untrue because he would have had to have been deceased when they saw him there. But what's being connected here? There's this narrative, right, of he's into bondage, he goes to drag shows, maybe he's a cross-dresser because he has women's clothing. In fact, though, he had been taking fashion design classes, and the clothes in his apartment could have been related to that. These are all important details to share, but I want to point out that most of the narrative we've heard around these things is all speculative. And that's one of the difficult things about this case is there's just so much speculation. I also have to talk about the door to the apartment because in about 99% of the articles or blogs that I've researched about this case mention that the door was locked from the outside, which infers that someone must have killed him and then locked the door on the way out. This does not appear to be true. I cannot find that in any official documents or interviews I've read about the inquest. Even the officer that was the one that went in doesn't seem to have ever mentioned that. That seems like a bit of internet fodder that's just spun out of control, that this is both a locked room and a locked bag mystery. It's just a locked bag mystery. I've even researched the door, which was replaced by MI6. That appears to be more security measure related. They owned the flat. I've also researched the type of locks used on these doors and can't find anything about them being just locked from one side or the other. So take all that with a grain of salt when you read it. And if you, listener, if you have more specific information about that to clarify this for me, email me at astudyofstrange@gmail.com. Investigators initially thought that this was murder. I mean, it's too weird. It's too odd. This can't have been an accident or a suicide. It's got to be murder. So they launched an inquiry, and over 3 years, they investigated very diligently. There were some leads, including, as an example, a couple that was seen entering the apartment building at one point that didn't live there. But that lead, like others, hit dead ends and could never be connected to Gareth Williams directly. In May of 2012, the inquest delivered its findings. Coroner Dr. Fiona Wilcox ruled that Gareth had been killed unlawfully, murdered. A year later, the Metropolitan Police concluded their own re-examination and arrived at a different conclusion, that Williams' death was probably an accident and that he most likely died alone. The coroner said murder, the police say accident. So pretty much right off the bat, we have two different conclusions. Then in 2021, an independent forensic review was commissioned and its findings were passed to the police in 2023. The centerpiece of that review, modern forensic techniques were applied to a green towel found in a kitchen cupboard in the flat, an item that had been considered potentially significant by investigators. The DNA on that towel belonged to Gareth Williams himself, not a third party, not anybody else. Combined with no new DNA evidence found anywhere in the resubmission, the police sources said that this made it more likely that Williams was alone when he died. If Gareth was alone, why was he in the bag? All right, so we have to stop here, do a little bit of housekeeping. I got to clear up some more misconceptions in the case. I know it's a lot to digest, but the reporting on this case was very sloppy. I think that has to do with the fact that it's very easy to come up with sensational headlines for this case, and it just led to a lot of misinformation. So the first misconception I want to talk about here is that it is physically impossible to lock oneself in that bag. At the inquest, one expert testified that despite hundreds of attempts, he was unable to lock himself inside the holdall. And that became the dominant narrative for years in this story. But after the inquest, a retired Royal Artillery Sergeant demonstrated that it is physically possible. You can climb into the bag, draw your knees up, pull the zippers together, and reach through the gap to lock the padlock shut. There are videos online of other people doing this as well. So the impossibility argument, though important, it just doesn't hold up under scrutiny, especially let's hypothetically say that Gareth Williams was into this type of thing, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the theories. This might not have been his first time doing it. He actually might have developed a technique to be able to get himself in this bag. But what is significant is that Gareth's DNA was not found on the padlock, the zippers, or other fastening mechanisms. I've also seen a lot of posts and articles claiming that he was on drugs. Toxicology tests conducted after his death revealed no traces of drugs, alcohol, or poison in his system. There was a later report that some GHB, I think it's called GHB, the date rape drug, was in his system. However, it was natural levels, so meaning your body actually creates that. It wasn't an amount that correlated to him being drugged. And that brings us to theories. I'm going to start with that this could be an intelligence hit. Most people that believe this point to Russia, so that's going to be the focus of my story here, but I will also mention that hypothetically, if that's what happened, it could have been other hostile nations, and some people also believe it could have been a cover-up by Gareth's own government. Gareth worked with extremely high security clearances, and Britain has a documented and grim history of Russian state violence on its soil. And here are a few examples, just a few examples out of many. There was Alexander Litvinenko in 2006. He was a former FSB officer who had publicly named Putin as responsible for the murder of a journalist. And Alexander was poisoned with polonium-210, a radioactive isotope so rare that only a state-level operation could source it, and it was administered in his tea. There's also Sergei Skripal in 2018. He was a former Russian military intelligence officer turned British double agent. A Russian GRU hit squad smeared a nerve agent on the door handle of his home. He and his daughter, Yulia, survived, but a British woman named Dawn Sturgis, who came into contact with this, did not survive. 2 GRU officers were publicly identified by name, and Russia, of course, denied everything. Boris Berezovsky in 2013, he was a Russian oligarch, fierce Putin critic. He was exiled and he was found dead in his locked bathroom with a ligature around his neck. Officially, it's a suicide. However, most people and experts tend to say that this was a hit. Again, those are just some examples. Those operations do share a signature. There's sophistication, there's deniability, and forensically relatively clean. But the specific claim that Russian intelligence would want to target Gareth Williams, that theory came about because of a story that he may have found a mole inside GCHQ. A former KGB defector named Boris Karpichkov gave interviews in 2015 claiming that Russian intelligence had killed Gareth with an untraceable poison introduced through his ear to protect a mole inside GCHQ. There is a significant problem with this theory, though. Most important is that of 2024, the police sources with direct knowledge of the investigation have said that there's no evidence to support these theories. And their specific point that Gareth was never in direct contact with Russian intelligence officers, his work was technical, that all undermines the framing of him as someone that the Foreign Service or a Foreign Service would need to neutralize face to face. Other people and experts that know Karpichkov and have looked into his story can also not verify any of it being real. Also, there's an interview I saw in a documentary made for Channel 5 about this case with a spy expert. I believe he's a former MI6 agent. Mentioned that when you assassinate somebody, when governments do this, you make sure that the person you're targeting is dead. Well, in this situation, Gareth was alive in the bag for a period of time after he was put in and then left. Could have gotten out after he was put in the bag and the assassin or assassins had left. You don't leave the potential for that to happen. And that I just thought that was it's like an obvious statement, but I thought it was very astute, and to me that kind of points away from a potential assassination. However, the heat in the apartment was turned up. That's never been explained, and one of the theories behind that is it could have been turned up to speed up decomposition, which then points back to murder. This story is just so strange. It's so bizarre. And also, if this was his own government taking a hit out on him, the only reason to suspect that is that he wasn't reported missing for a week. That is very odd behavior from MI6. The next theory is the accidental death, the what's called claustrophilia hypothesis. And this is what the Metropolitan Police's working conclusion currently is. Some investigators who worked the case came to believe that Williams was into what was termed claustrophilia, deriving pleasure from confining himself in tight, enclosed spaces. The evidence assembled around this view is circumstantial, but it's not negligible. His Cheltenham landlords found him tied up to his bed frame that I mentioned earlier. He looked up some bondage sites, and crucially, there was the key inside the bag with him, positioned as what a Metropolitan Police source described as possibly his way of punching a hole out, sort of a safety emergency exit that he just might not have reached in time. The theory is that it would have worked like this. Gareth climbed into the bag voluntarily, locked it from the inside, and was overwhelmed by hypercapnia, which is the buildup of carbon dioxide as the oxygen inside the bag depleted. The pathologist confirmed that this would have taken just 2 to 3 minutes. There were no injuries on his body consistent with being forced in, and no injuries consistent with a struggle in the apartment. But here's what nags at me, and at plenty of investigators, is the absence of his DNA on the fastening mechanisms, the lock, the bathtub. Now, you're not guaranteed to always leave a fingerprint or DNA on everything. It's sort of a misnomer, but there's so much of not DNA or fingerprints that it's odd. And if you're locking a padlock, your hands are going to touch the padlock. If you're zipping a zipper, your hands are going to touch the zipper, and yet nothing. Also, why a key as your safety emergency exit? I don't think a little key to a little padlock is strong enough to get through the canvas. I think those bags are made out of canvas. Why not scissors or a knife? It just doesn't make sense. And also, I'll mention again the heat. Why was the heat on? It was hot outside. There's no reason to have the heat on, and it was turned all the way up. Why would you do that to yourself? Is that part of the claustrophilia thing? No one's been able to explain that clearly. And the last theory is that there was a known visitor who panicked. This possibility involves Gareth inviting somebody into his flat, someone from his private life that hasn't been shared with other people, like friends or family, and they decided to do this thing where Gareth gets into a bag and then something goes wrong. So the theory here being that everything was consensual. And perhaps his companion panicked when Gareth lost consciousness very quickly and wiped the surfaces in a panic and left. This theory, I'll admit, is harder to sustain after the forensic review when they found no evidence of anybody else being in the flat at all. I will point out that's often usually incorrectly reported that there's just no DNA anywhere. There was, there's DNA, and they found samples of DNA around the apartment, but nothing to point it to people being there that night, except for Williams. However, it's worth mentioning that theory because it is a possibility. Gareth Williams was buried on the 26th of September 2010, his 32nd birthday. Former colleagues from the intelligence service attended, and so did Sir John Sawyers, the head of MI6, the chief of the Secret Intelligence Service, at the funeral. Make of that what you will. His parents and family have never spoken publicly about the death, and there are so many things that we don't understand about this case. Even investigators, forensic experts, former intelligence officers, all of these people that have investigated the case and been interviewed about it and contributed to the inquest, it seems they all have different theories. Gareth Williams spent his career turning complexity into meaning, decoding patterns, finding secret code. He was, by all accounts, exceptional at it. But the secrets of his own death appear unsolvable, and I, for one, wish that we had his help. Thank you for listening to A Study of Strange. If you have experienced something strange, mysterious, and unusual, I want to hear about it. Email me at astudyofstrange@gmail.com, and you might get to be on the show. Thank you, good night, and stay strange.